Hello. Hello, the Castro. Thank you very much for having me back. It's terrific to be here in what's fast becoming one of my absolutely favourite film festivals, and great joy. So here we are, from over the pond, with a 100-year-old transatlantic tale. It's a well-known story from almost exactly a century ago, May 1915, the sinking of the Cunard liner, the RMS Lusitania, by a torpedo shot from the U-20 submarine, German submarine. By 1915, we're in the era where everything was filmed. So all great news events were filmed in one way or another. So it's really part of this new media world. But it was by no means the free and independent press that we know today, kind of. It was difficult for people to get footage of things as it was happening. So they used really what they could to report on current events and great incidents like this one. So they would usually supplement newsreels with found footage that had already been shot, and we'll see some of that. And they would use anything relevant to tell the story. So when the reports came through about the Lusitania being sunk, they used old footage repackaged with shots of things such as the relatives crowded outside the Cunard offices, waiting for news of their relatives. They took film of the ensuing riots that happened, particularly in Liverpool, Manchester and London, but actually all over the world, even as far away as New Zealand. The anger was such caused by the event. And here the cameras could really only catch the aftermath. We'll see some of that. From reportage of the immediate events, it was a short step to use of the media, including film, as propaganda. We'll see some of these as well. So, although no actual film of the sinking was possible, cartoonists could imagine it. These were often based on the accounts from real survivors, and they would embellish it with comment in the intertitles. These began to be produced almost straight away in 1915 in Britain by animators such as Dudley Buxton and G.E. Studdy, and in America, the most talented animator of the period, of course, Winsor McCay. We'll see his groundbreaking animation later on. This was not released, obviously, until 1918, by which time America was part of the global war. McKay's film is also propaganda, but it's also art, importantly, and illustrates the power that visual media has. There were even Lusitania survivors who claimed to have remembered things that they couldn't possibly have seen, such as the conning tower of the submarine and Germans kind of mocking and sort of ridiculing the British ship as it sank. This never happened. It's absolutely provable that it never happened, but their memory had become overlaid with the constant telling of stories, the propaganda that was put about in illustrations and also in films. So in this selection of archival survivals from the BFI, we've got fragments of newsreels, we've got the cartoons, as I mentioned, which have pretty much never been seen by anyone. What we're going to do is to bring it together with some accounts, eyewitness accounts, and some later writings about this harrowing experience. So somewhere within the propaganda and mudslinging that the event attracted is this very human story which we should bring out. Of course, this being an archival story, there are also lots of funny little connections that we can make with the world of film and the Lusitania incident. There are several lost films, American films. The Kaiser, Beast of Berlin, subtle title. And a film made by one of the Lusitania survivors, Rita Jolivet, an actress who worked with Charles Frohman, who went down on the Lusitania, called Lest We Forget. She managed actually to incorporate her experiences on the Lusitania in 2 films, both of which are lost, I think. An interesting note is that there were several film personalities who very nearly travelled on the Lusitania. One was the great British actress Ellen Terry, and the other one was William Gillette. How about that? He didn't get on the ship, and he made the film so that Rob could find it and restore it, and round we go. The other nice little anecdote just to share is that there was a film on the Lusitania itself. We don't think it was part of the kind of entertainment on board. There's no evidence that we found for that, but it's possible that it was being taken by a distributor to London, so another nice transatlantic moment. And we're going to get to the slide in a bit. Let's crack on through the slides, chaps. More propaganda. Okay, and the next slide. Here it is, delivered from the salvage company to the BFI in a bucket. That's the original film that came off the bottom of the sea, and it's an American film called Carpet from Baghdad. And the next slide, here it is, not looking so good. But then if you'd spent 67 years at the bottom of the sea, I guess you would look like that too. What an interesting thing. But you see, it almost looks like, this is a piece of 35mm leader here, and that looks almost like it's 16mm. We thought it was at first, but that's actually just shrunk. But we were able to identify it rather remarkably by some intertitles as we went through. And so it's a film called Carpet from Baghdad, which is, effectively lost because we're never going to be able to run it, as you can see. Or really restore it to any great degree. And apparently it was a really rotten film, so no terrible loss. Anyway, on with the show. So it's my great privilege. I was very excited when Stacey told me that she was inviting the actor Paul McGann back to do the Ghost Train, which we'll be seeing later on. And I have very cheekily put him to use to read some of these contemporary accounts of people who were on the Lusitania when it went down, and some of the people who've written about it subsequently. So, if you can see, are you there?
I'm here.
Here he is.
I'm here.
There we go.
Good morning.
Paul, of course, as well as being a native of Liverpool, which was the hometown of the Lusitania, is also a great aficionado of the history of World War I, and I think one of your very early roles, the monocled mutineer, was fantastic with you playing.
It's the one that got me going.
Yeah, fantastic. If you ever get to see it, please do. It's really a very remarkable series about the First World War.
Well, see me later. I'll do bits of it in the corridor for you.
So we put together these films and some of the commentary, which Paul will be reading. It's I've written here, deliciously impromptu production, so that any fluffs or mistakes are my fault. So come see me afterwards if it all goes horribly wrong. But here we go with the lovely Lucy, Pride of Liverpool, and Paul McGann, and to take us through the show and play to the films, of course, the wonderful Donald Sosin. Yeah. I'll leave you in the hands of Mr. Paul McGann.
Thank you. So as you heard, the following is a mixture of contemporary accounts and later writings about the Lusitania. Thank you. When they were built, 7 years before the Great War, the Cunard sisters, Lusitania and Mauritania, were the largest, fastest, most luxurious passenger ships afloat, and could carry 3,000 passengers and crew. Cunard's stated purpose was to reclaim for Britain the blue riband. Lusitania achieved this triumph on her second voyage from Liverpool to New York, which took only 4 days, 19 hours and 52 minutes. Robert K. Massey. The following is from Amy Fitzgerald, who happened to be staying in Queenstown on the day that Lusitania went down. Friday, 7th of May. Such a glorious day, with nothing to indicate the awful tragedy about to be enacted within a few short miles of the shore. On our return to the hotel, we were at once greeted with the dreadful news. The Lusitania had been torpedoed about 10 miles from Queenstown. Everyone had a different story. Some said she was coming in under her own steam and all was safe. Others said she'd gone to the bottom. But all too soon we knew the truth. In they came, dripping, pale, exhausted, some unconscious, others on stretchers, injured in every possible way. Children crying for their mothers, husbands looking with anxious eyes for their wives and families, wives looking for husbands who they would probably never see again. Euston Station at 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning is generally not a lively place. I hadn't stepped a foot from the door of the coach when I was almost mobbed by a bunch of reporters. When the reporters found they couldn't get anything out of me, they cleared out and I was surrounded by relatives of the passengers who asked me dozens of questions. But my nerve wasn't too good for this ordeal. I was fast breaking when a young man pushed through and asked if I was an American. When I told him yes, he said he was secretary to Ambassador Page. And was there anything he could do for me? I almost fell on his neck with joy. Charles Laureate, a Lusitania passenger. Mrs. Rose Ellen Murray, wife of a US naval officer, who was caught up in the confusion of people looking for loved ones after the sinking. About 7 o'clock in the morning, I went down to the morgue to look for my brother, but I couldn't find him. And they brought me back to the hotel, where I again became unconscious. I got out on the street again and I went to get some clothes. And I was just passing the Cunard offices when I saw my brother. I became hysterical. And when he saw me, he was almost hysterical too. We both thought we should never see each other alive again. We were happy after that. The people at Queenstown were more than nice. They couldn't do enough for us, it seemed. And Charles Laureate, again, felt the same about the kindness of the local people. When we went up to the street in Queenstown, it was filled with people willing to help and do anything in their power to relieve our sufferings. I've heard stories about Scottish hospitality, but I never saw anything more spontaneous or genuine or more freely given than the Irish hospitality of Queenstown. Pat O'Mara was a labourer working in Liverpool in 1915. In his memoir, he describes his involvement in anti-German riots that broke out after the sinking. It was 5 o'clock one evening, and I was watching the homecoming dockers when a newsboy came yelling, "Sinking at the Lusitania." The men stopped short. Women peered from doorways. I joined one anxious group poring over the fatal news. It was right. The Lucy, the fine boat that I'd left Joe and Harold aboard not 2 months ago, had been torpedoed. We walked around Scotland Road listening to the cries of women whose husbands and sons had gone down with the Lucy. We walked down Bostock Street, where practically every blind was drawn in token of a death. All these little houses were occupied by Irish coal trimmers and firemen and sailormen on the Lusitania. Now these men, who barely 2 weeks ago had carried their bags jokingly down the street, were gone, never to return. Something was afoot, and like good slummy boys, we crowded around, eager to help in any disturbance. Suddenly something crashed up near Ben Jonson Street, followed in turn by another terrific crash of glass. We ran up the road, and a pork butcher's had had its front window knocked in with a brick. A little higher up, the same thing was happening. Everything suggestive of Germany was being smashed to pieces. Now, these rarely seen British cartoons show how fast a tragedy became a story, cynically used for propaganda.
Okay, and now we're just going to take a look. I know you've seen it before at this festival, but it bears repeating. The wonderful animation, groundbreaking animation by Winsor McCay, The Sinking of the Lusitania 1918. We're going to start, in the interest of time, just after the prologue where you see Winsor McCay making the film, and go straight into the story. And Donald will be playing, and we'll have some more from Paul as we go through the film. Thank you.
Once again from Robert K. Massey's Castles of Steel, Britain, Germany, and the winning of the Great War at sea. On board Lusitania, some passengers were still at lunch, and others were strolling on deck enjoying the spring sunshine when the torpedo struck. At first, there was no concern. There was concern, but no panic. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt devoted himself to trying to put life jackets on women and children. Charles Frohman, smoking an after-lunch cigar, was handed a life jacket, but soon gave it away to a woman. Together, passengers and crew members began tying other life jackets onto wicker baskets brought from the nursery, in which infants remained sleeping. When it became apparent that the ship's rapid list to starboard would make it difficult to fill and launch the lifeboats, concern turned to alarm, then terror. The lifeboats on the starboard side now hung far out over the sea, while those on the port side swung in over the rails or against the side of the ship. Several lifeboats were released at one end only. The first boat launched in this manner was filled with women and children who spilled helplessly into the water 70 feet below. Other boats, lowered too hastily and steeply, touched water bow or stern first and foundered immediately. Still others smashed inboard against the side of the vessel, crushing their passengers as the lifeboat disintegrated. At the end, as Lusitania's bow plunged towards the granite seafloor 300 feet below, the liner's stern rose high in the air. At this angle, guy wires snapped, and towering 78-foot funnels and even taller wireless masts toppled onto the decks. Rumbling internal explosions of steam hurled debris, bodies, and huge bubbles of water into the air. When the clouds of steam had cleared, Lusitania was gone. Since the torpedo struck, 18 minutes had passed. Only 6 of the liner's 48 lifeboats floated amid the wreckage, and hundreds of men and women were struggling individually in the calm, green, sunlit sea. A ship's junior officer swimming through the wreckage found himself listening to the cries of infants, floating nearby in their wicker baskets. There was nothing he could do. Gradually, the baskets sank,